Harrison, I feel very honored to be sitting here with you.
I'm just blown away to be sitting here with you. This is the coolest thing.
I know I have so many burning questions, but I feel that the best way to maybe start this off is by you reading a few pages from the book. So
Ooh.
I'd love to invite you to do that.
I would love to. I'm going to read the opening for you because it obviously sets the stage for everything to come. And because it's real sad. So this is from chapter 1, Circus, or The Boy Who Wore a Very Loud Hat. I don't know where I came from, but I remember craving something sweet. So I stopped at the coffee shop on my way home. I must have been about 16. I drove down in my black Toyota Echo, but I left there feeling 8 or 9 years old. I was standing in line for a donut, or 6 donut holes in a box, when an elderly white woman turned around, saw me behind her, and shouted out, "Little black waif." She said each word sharply, with beats in between, loud enough for everyone to notice. The room fell so silent I heard my tinnitus, the ringing that starts when the world goes away. One moment, I stood in a long line of people. The next, I was locked in a liminal space with a stranger whose hatred immobilized me. It felt like the power went out in the building, but I couldn't breathe, just as I couldn't see, and I found myself wondering, how do I move? So I knew that the power had only gone out from my body. And then it was over. The elderly white woman's partner laid hands on her lovingly, graciously, leading her back to the counter to order a Dutchie, a cruller, and 2 double-doubles. I looked around at the tables, hoping that the woman was shouting at somebody else, and I saw that it couldn't be anyone else, and the rest of the coffee shop's customers already knew that. I felt every pair of eyes identify me, the weight of the white gaze descending, impressing upon me, imagining who might this little black waif be, and where did he come from, and what did he do to provoke this poor woman? But interest in me faded quickly, and suddenly I disappeared, as though nothing had happened to anyone. No one saw anything. The power of their denial teleported me outside. 1 minute I was there, and then I wasn't. I was simply whisked away, as if by magic. When I got home without any donuts, my white family wouldn't believe me. I must have misheard or done something wrong, they insisted, and 5 sets of cynical eyes took me back to the scene of the crime. Let's go through it again. My mother, who micromanaged all that I imagined, suggested that somehow I'd shown disrespect. It felt like she wanted to blame me. I wanted to help her, but nothing I could think of would explain the old lady's explosion. I didn't jump the queue. I didn't fail to hold the door. The woman was in front of me. I didn't stand too close. I didn't dance or curse. I didn't try to snatch her purse. She was probably demon-possessed, said my mother, who saw the devil everywhere. But even this failed to account for the outburst. What was it about me that so offended her evil spirit, and why would it suddenly erupt right there in the coffee shop? And why, if my mother's suspicions were true, would the Lord leave me so unprotected? What was I wearing, I wonder now? I don't recall. I've lost sight of myself over time. My day-to-day style that particular summer was Hawaiian print, mostly, so maybe the loudness offended the woman. But it could have been Sunday, and then I'd be dressed up for church. Who could be bothered by church clothes? A demon-possessed sort of person, perhaps. Maybe my mother was right, and the incident wasn't about race at all. I was adopted. I began in Vancouver, British Columbia, the westernmost province of Canada, cut from my birth mother's womb in July 1985. She was 15 or 16 years old, in foster care then, just a wayward black youth who engaged in premarital sex with the star of her high school soccer team. He was a white kid. His family was German. Keeping this biracial baby was out of the question, but so was abortion. The families were Christian. Surrender was all but imposed on the mother. She had little say in the matter. She took me to term, and they took me away, born to no one, a ward of the Salvation Army's Grace Hospital. 11 days later, the paperwork cleared. A wealthy white couple arrived to collect me. They didn't take me far. The city of Abbotsford is about an hour's drive east into the Fraser Valley, named for the river that emerges there from the canyons at sea level. The fertile region is rich with raspberries and religion and is derisively nicknamed the Bible Belt of British Columbia on account of its many churches. In Abbotsford, the largest Fraser Valley community, there are nearly 100 congregations, one for every 1,000 residents, and the nickname is a point of pride. If this is the Bible Belt, pastors would say, then Abbotsford must be the buckle. The mostly white suburb, which borders on Washington State, is also the site of the only recorded lynching in Canadian history. The 14-year-old victim, a Stolo boy named Louis Sam, was hung from a tree by a mob of Americans dressed as his people. Not 101 years before my arrival, and just down the road from my house, by the mini golf course. But I didn't know that then. Abbotsford's history never came up. We were starting from scratch. I was raised in a vacuum, brought up between bed sheets, educated at home from grade 4 to grade 12 through a Christian curriculum published in Florida. Some children thrive on independent study. For me, a black adoptee, cut off from my community and trapped in an all-white cocoon, it meant finding my way with no context for my situation, no sense of shared struggle or circumstance, and no contact with those who could help me to see what I needed to see to make sense of the world. In a roundabout way, my white family created me, for all creation stories begin with a separation. They gave me a new name. They gave me a language that limited how I envisioned myself. They told me that I was delivered, not into the arms of a woman who loved me, but out of the darkness. My creation was sinful. 2 sinners had sinned. That's how I was made. That's what I was. And sin makes God sick to his stomach. He can't even look at it. But somehow, he saw me, they said, and he gave me to them. I believed them, and so I was saved. I became born again. Thereafter, I came to imagine my blackness as proof of my brush with the fires of hell. What a relief to escape with the skin of my teeth.
Whew. Thanks for reading that. I think if you haven't read it already, there's nothing like Harrison's voice, and there's no question I could have asked besides him reading it. And I have to say, I'm on second read. Okay? I have lots of thoughts, but so much of your experience has been you silenced, whether it's your experience, your race, your identity. What's it like now, sitting on a stage? What's it like talking about this, having your story out in the world?
This is awesome, right? This is unbelievable. People are being really nice and very sensitive. They'll be like, I enjoyed your book. Am I allowed to say that? They'll say, you had me laughing at some parts. Is that okay? Of course it's okay. What's exciting for me is just finally being able to talk about this and even to dictate the terms of that conversation. I feel like so much of my life has been defending my perspective, defending my reality, and then giving way to the pressure from folks in this other reality. To change my story, to change my recollection of how things went, or to find a way to blame myself, or to change my behavior as a result of whatever happened. And I hated that. When I was younger, I would write these little manifestos. I felt like my parents just weren't getting what I was trying to say. I'd say, no, it's different for me. Like, you don't understand. Like, the room was one way, but then I saw it change the moment I walked in. I saw that. How did you not see that? And they'd say, oh, well, you're just making it up, It was maddening. So I would try to write everything down. I really believed I could explain this to them, and then they would get it, and we'd move on from there, with an understanding and a shared reality. But that just never happened, and it didn't matter how good I got at writing or how good I got at explaining, or if I took the time to take notes and write everything down and really try to document the facts. They didn't want to hear that, and I got tired of trying to tell them, and I decided instead I'll just tell everybody.
Is that why now?
I mean, it's a big part of why now. I think that, really why now was I didn't want to be a journalist anymore. So this was my only other idea.
I get that.
It's a funny joke, but it's 100% true. I didn't want to do that. And I did feel a little bit like I'd fallen into journalism because I was afraid to tell my own story. So instead you tell other people's stories, and the magic of journalism is, you care for as long as you're writing it, and then you send it off to your editors and you don't have to care anymore. There was a while there where I would watch the comments, or I would be online just seeing people react to it, and then I realized, that's a huge waste of time. I don't care. So I would just move on to the next story, and that was that. But at the same time, journalism, you're still kind of writing in that other reality, this one I was trying to leave, and you're telling the stories that, that white people want to hear, and you're not going into the communities that, I want to be involved in, the stories where you're not telling the stories that I think need to be told. You're leaving out all this context, and you're just kind of not touching a whole side of the world. And I felt like I was really working in service of the exact narrative I had fled. So, when I took the buyout, it was just so freeing, because I had started to feel guilty about everything I published. I would rewrite a police press release, and I'd think, I'm writing propaganda. That's what I'm doing. Or I'd one time I had to call the daughter of a murder victim, and I just kind of did, called her like, oh, I'm so sorry. But I was just doing the job, and it made me feel gross and seedy. And I just felt like, you're running from this story that you want to tell. And then you're doing a bad job telling other people's stories as a result. I don't want to do that anymore. I kind of felt like it was time. I had to tell it and move on.
I mean, you're incredibly vulnerable, and I am one of those people who probably told you, I laughed quite a few times reading this, and there was a sort of sense of guilt at certain points. I think I told you the very first sentence where I laughed out loud was, it's classic God.
Classic God.
Classic God.
Yeah.
You mentioned the words invisible boy. I think quite a bit in, I don't remember what chapter, page 80 something for the first time. You and I have talked about this notion of only blacks.
Yes.
And it is, and every time I talk about this to white people, I get this sort of gaze. And I think it is very specific to the Black British Columbian experience, but I also think it is a universal racialized experience, whether it's your childhood or in a corporate setting or at work where you're the only one. And I felt that upon just seeing the title of this memoir. And when it dropped there on page 80, whatever, forgive me for not remembering, I thought to myself, what does this mean? How do other people interpret this? So can you explain the title? So the title comes kind of directly from Mystery Men, and I can see Daniel laughing there at the back. This is Daniel Wagner, who appears in the book multiple times as Daniel Wagner, the boy who died. An incredible friend of mine. He's a wonderful guy, and he let me give him a nickname that I hope just sticks for the rest of your life, honestly. Are you Daniel Wagner, the boy who died? Invisible Boy comes from Mystery Men. The character played by Kel Mitchell, and he's a black boy who can go invisible, but only when no one is looking at him. So it's kind of a dubious superpower, but it is real. It's just, it only works under these particular circumstances. And, there's a joke when the other superheroes come to meet him where they
They head up to his room, and he says to his dad, who's just paying no attention to him, "Hey, Dad, I'm going to my room with 3 strange men." And his dad just kind of shrugs. Like it's clear that there's, this joke is working on another level. This kid has found a kind of power in being invisible because he's invisible so much. And so that really spoke to me, and it also just felt, like the story I was trying to tell, where I don't become the person I am if I'm not just so mad about what's happening and so frustrated that I can't tell all these stories. And, I'm trying to learn and I'm trying to grow and change to be who, these people want me to be. And I just felt like, okay, well, I'm getting bigger, I'm getting stronger. No one's really seeing that, but it's happening. And, by the end of the book, I feel like I've gotten very big, very weird. And, I've walked into a superpower. That's why I'm wearing my crown tonight. It's,
I was going to ask.
It's, did you notice?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's my therapy crown. It reminds me that I did it and that I'm...
You did it.
I did it.
You did it.
This was so hard. Thank you. So that's what Invisible Boy is about, really. It's just, you're hyper visible as the only black person in an all white space, or as the only racialized person, or just as the clear, obvious other. You know that everybody can see you, but you also know that nobody is really engaging with that otherness and with the way that you have to engage with that otherness and respond to it in order to belong in that space. There's just such a pronounced interiority that comes with being the only one of you in any space, and you can see that, and it gives you just kind of a broader view of the space itself. But then it also forces you to stand beside yourself and see what you need to tweak or you need to change in order to minimize that feeling of otherness. I think that being invisible is an opportunity for this incredible kind of growth and insight, and it's also just immensely painful, just a horrible, hard-fought wisdom. And I knew that there were, thousands, or I'm not sure which large number to use, thousands, hundreds, millions. I knew that there were lots and lots of people who would identify with that, and who would read this book and say, "Oh, he's talking about me." And I know that it's a memoir, so he's clearly talking about himself, but it seems like maybe he peered into my life. So, yes, that's why Invisible Boy.
Now you can be seen.
I did it. Yeah, look at me with my fancy crown and my fancy book, my audience of people from my past.
Not creepy at all.
Look at you guys. Some of you, it's so weird to see you here. Hi, Judy. Wow. Judy grew up the hill from me. She can corroborate everything. It was so weird, I'm sure. Really looking forward to what you remember about that very strange time in my life.
You actually bring up a good point. What is it like sharing, what is the emotional experience of sharing your lived experience? Do you worry? Do you worry about corroborating?
Yeah, because this is a dispatch from another reality, and so I worry about the folks in the one that I left saying, "Hey, this isn't what happened." And I really went out of my way to make sure that there were people who could corroborate and make sure that I had evidence for everything, because I just knew that some of this stuff was going to be disputed. And so far that hasn't happened, but my experience is that it's always disputed. And I wanted to make sure that, I crossed all my T's and dotted my I's. I'm still really scared. I'm scared of what my adoptive parents will say if they say anything. The book's been out for a week, and I haven't heard a peep, and that's probably for the best. But I mean, it's still like my dream, right, is that my mom calls and is like, oh, I read the book and I'm so sorry. I was wrong about a lot. It was very brave of you. Like, here's that unicorn that you talked about. Give it back. Yeah, give back my unicorn. I want that. I want growth, and I want to be able to hold on to her still. Because for the longest time it was this family or no family. And I've grown up since then, and I've built my own family, and it's amazing, and it makes me feel really insulated and confident. I feel like I don't have the same. I'm not as worried about what I'm about to lose by sharing these stories. But yeah, I mean, my parents. I mean, they're my abusers, so I'm still really afraid of them. And even though I don't see them, I almost never see them, and they're not part of my life. And, often when we do see them, we just remind ourselves like, hey, this is today, and then they go home and we go back to our regular lives. I'm still really scared. So I'm trying to be brave, and, I decided, like, I'm going to do it. I've never seen this done. I think it's discouraged to write a book that is this critical of your own upbringing, or that raises all these issues about the ethics of adoption at all. But like, let's do it. Let's start this conversation. And, if I am killed for it, fine. I really didn't feel like I could go on living if I couldn't tell my own life story. It felt like, that's what we do. That's how we introduce ourselves to one another. That's how we make friends. And in my case, as a storyteller, like, this was the only one I wanted to tell. And I want to tell other stories, but like, this one is there, and it's the one that's ready, and it's the one that's in the way. And, if I can't tell it, it just feels like, well, yeah, then I can't live. So, yeah, I had to.
I'm really glad you did.
Thank you.
So much of this is a love story, or at least on my second read, that's how I take it. A love story to the boy, a love story to yourself, a love story to your family, to Trinika. You're a father now.
Yes.
How has this experience of writing this and sharing your story impacted the love story that you're creating for your two beautiful Black children?
Oh, yeah. It's such a huge part of it. I think, like I said, without the family that I have now, I felt like I couldn't do this, because I would have had no family. But, there's also just all of this, I've learned a lot about how to be a dad, just kind of on the fly. And the one thing I'm pretty sure of is your kids don't listen to you. They just watch what you do.
Right.
So, I thought back to what I had learned about what my parents did. And it changed the way I parented immediately, because I realized, like, oh, they were really mean. And it's not cool to spank your kids. Like, that's just hitting your kids. I had a friend tell me when I adopted a cat, he's like, look, like, you're really big and your cat's really small, and every time that you engage with your cat, it's just two giant hands reaching down to touch this cat. So all the cat knows is whether or not these are nice hands, And I thought about that. And I thought, like, yeah, I never experienced nice hands. I didn't get hugged. And the touch that I did experience was mostly spanking. They weren't nice hands. I don't want to do that. I don't want my kids to be like, oh, here comes dad. And I thought about all those spankings, and I thought about, one of the times that they didn't eat. And I was like, you gotta make them eat. And then my wife was like, well, you can't make them eat. And I thought, well, when I was a kid, I didn't eat. And so they tied me to a chair. And then my wife said, that's weird. I'm dead serious. And I was like, come to think of it, that is super weird. And so I brought it up to my therapist. I've been thinking about it for a couple of days and kind of putting the pieces together and thinking about all the things that my parents did to me that I would not do to my kids, because my wife would throw me out of the house. One time I yelled at him and she was like, get out of the house. I thought about that stuff, and I realized, oh, I've been abused. I brought up the incident where I was tied to a chair to my therapist, and she gasped, which is normal. There's always a lot of gasping with my therapist. I'll be like, well, then this happened, and she'll be like, that's just.
Jokes aside, it's in the book, and I gasp.
Yeah, right?
I think that's a natural reaction.
It's funny, I wrote that part like, ha ha ha, and then...
Ha ha?
Well, not, it wasn't like ha ha, but it was also like, people will understand that this is just how parents are. And then I told my therapist, like, oh yeah, because the story was on my mind. And yeah, she gasped. And then, yeah, she said, Harrison, there's a word that we still haven't used in all the time that we've talked together. I was like, I was abused, I know. Because I was realizing that in real time as my children made me realize that. And I really feel like as you read the book, like it's not just the story of this kid being radicalized. Like this is the story of the author getting increasingly angry as he goes through the narrative of his life and realizes how fucked up it actually is. Even now, because it's my life and so it's normalized for me. I'm a little blown away at like how shocking all of these events seem to people. I'm like, well, didn't that happen to you? But it turns out no, and it never does, and that's the whole point. And I've had adoptees reach out to me since this book came out, like, yeah, that happened to me, and I just think, yeah, I knew it. That's why I'm writing this book, is because often you don't even know that you've been abused or you've been mistreated until you hear somebody else talking about the same treatment and calling it mistreatment. And then, you go back and you're like, well, if that's mistreatment, I've been mistreated several times. I've been mistreated often, come to think of it. Suddenly this particular form of mistreatment has a name. And then once it has a name, it goes around and other people realize, hey, I've been mistreated this way. And that's how you get a movement and that's how you get change. And it just feels like, in the case of being an adoptee, there's so much that I thought was singular that I think is actually quite universal. And my hope is that as this book, reaches more and more people, I'll learn that more of my own experiences were very universal and feel validated. We'll see how that goes, but that's certainly what I would like.
Validation.
Oh yeah,
that's a big one.
Oh, it's so good.
Yeah.
You read validation? Wow.
Okay, speaking of validation, you once loaned me your entire record collection.
Loaned? I gave it to you.
I know.
That's yours.
I'm still saying loaned.
That is yours.
Still saying loaned.
Yours.
I don't think I ever told you this, but it was like a terrifying reflection into my own identity crisis.
Just like all of the records?
Just all of the records, but also for me, and this isn't about me, but seeking and trying to understand my own Blackness, so much of that was through music.
Yeah.
And as I went through record by record, which by the way, I think I only finished the last one like a couple of months ago. It's a huge collection team, huge.
Yeah. There was no room for it after I had two kids.
Exactly. Thank you. The question here is, we're talking about being seen and we're talking about validation. And for me, in that moment, it struck me while I was reading the book, and it actually struck me at a piece where, what does it mean to be Black?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What
does it mean, especially when you're seeking it or you're confused or you don't see it around you? And the first time that really came up for me in the book was going to camp.
Oh, yeah.
Meeting Courage. And Courage was, and forgive me if I misquote here, the only real Black person in the room. And he said this as you're there. What does that mean?
Yeah, that's a great question. That was a moment where it was just kind of the first time that I'd had another perspective on my own Blackness. It had been all these white people telling me what it means to be a Black person, or TV telling me what it means to be a Black person, and I was pretty sure that I was a Black person. I was 14. I was confident that I had been Black my whole life.
Right.
But then, I was so used to being the only Black kid in any room, And then Courage showed up, and to my mind, he was just blacker. He was he was darker, but then he was also like from Nigeria, like he was born there, and he had an accent, and it was endearing to people, and I was so jealous because I suddenly. Like I was nothing. I was so used to being the only black kid, and like I had lost that identity. And Courage was just crushing it. Like he was the most endearing. He was the cutest black kid. Like just the best black kid. And I was so disappointed. Like I thought I was a really good black kid, but this kid's a way better black kid. And so we had kind of a simmering rivalry. We got along, but we knew that we were competing for the affections of all the white kids at this camp. And I don't think that we could have put that into words at the time, but still there was a rivalry. And so on the last night of camp, we had a moving fireside service, and a number of the campers got up to speak about how they were feeling about this or that, and Courage got up and he gave this heartfelt speech, and he said, I'd just like to thank everybody for being so welcoming to me as the only black kid at camp. And I was like, and I said, hey! And by then everybody knew my voice because I do not stop talking. And so everybody laughed, but it was a laugh that made me feel bad. I was like, they're not laughing because I am also here. They're laughing because they get what courage means. And then Courage said, oh, I'm sorry. And I mean, I'm saying this like all snarky, like, and then he was like just the kindest kid. Like he didn't mean to be mean, but he said, oh, I'm sorry. I meant the only real black person. And then like, oh, what a zinger. Like everybody was just, the laughter. And it just felt like it was my expense. And I went home and I really thought about it because I thought, yeah, like what is blackness if you can think you have it, but then like another black person comes along and now you don't, like, and you can, you can have it in a space of all white people, but in a space of all black people, suddenly you're not black, because of your upbringing. And it threw me, and it launched me into this whole identity crisis. And it took me a long time to realize that, blackness it's not biological. I'm not, obviously there's some parts of it that are, but like I'm not half black, like I'm black, and that comes from my experience, and that comes from my understanding that this reality that I live in is a real reality, and it comes from the way now that I see other black folks, and I see solidarity with other black folks before anything else, and realizing that blackness is experiential and political. That really changed my life. And so now I think about blackness as it's this broad, I said experiential political thing, that it just has so much more to do with you and what you've gone through than it does with what the white people around you think that it is. But it took me a long time to realize that. So, I'm always very nervous about trying to define what blackness is. But I can tell you that it is not defined by the white people in your life. It is defined by you and your experiences and your solidarity with other black folks.
Mm-hmm. And simply by being black.
Yeah.
Yeah. You don't even get to choose that part.
Yeah, it's true.
So do you feel like a real black person now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. I did say earlier that I see this as a love story, and you say it in the book that you wanted yours to be a love story.
Mm-hmm.
Trinika passed away earlier this year.
Yeah.
And I'm so sorry. I can't imagine. I hope talking about this helps you process your grief. Mm-hmm. Where were things left with her?
They were. We were close at the end. The first time that I met her, which is an account that's in this book. That was life changing, but it was also just so terrifying. like by that point I was kind of jaded about love and, about family. And I had been warned that, meeting your birth parents is not all that it's cracked up to be. My adoptive mom said that all the time. She said that just recently. She said the last time she came over. So it was kind of always the approach, just like, this isn't gonna go well. And then I met her, and she was just me. Like I remember she came in the door and kind of opened it, and tried to push it, but it was a pull, and I was like, oh, and then she came in and looked around and was like, I'm the only one in here. I'm here. But that kind of jittery, anxious personality was just so familiar to me. And then her face was like, well, that's my face, and I'd never seen anybody with my face. I'd watch TV and be like, I guess that person is Black, but they don't look like me. I was in Korea once, and these 5 Korean kids ran up to me and they were like, Michael Jordan, oh my God. And then I was like, oh, I'm not Michael Jordan. And then one of the kids was like, oh, he's your dad, But that kind of thing would happen where people would be like, oh, you look like this Black person. And be like, I don't. I share one characteristic with them, but I don't look like them, and I know that. But when my mom walked in the door, she looked just like me, and it just gave me all this context for my life, and it it made me feel real. So that was really terrifying. It kind of just rewrote me. I've said that that was the moment that I really felt born again. But that was very discombobulating. And when you're that jaded about love, and then suddenly you experience love at first sight, just objectively, oh, that's what this is. I know for a fact that this can happen. That was terrifying. And I just felt my attraction to her. I wanted to just hug her and look at her, and it was too much. It was so intense. And so I kind of hid from her. I hid from her for 7 years, and we reconnected 5 years ago, and it turns out that she was hiding from me for all the same reasons, because of course we were the same. And from that moment on, we just kind of decided, well, we want a relationship. So I understand that we have these walls and we have all this fear, and this feels weird, but it won't feel weird 30 years from now. When I know you I know my adoptive mother, it won't feel weird eventually. So all we have to do now, in order to recover this and just kind of to get back the relationship that was stolen from us, is we have to push through the discomfort. And so we did that, and we got to a point where we really knew each other. And I wrote this book in large part because it was a perfect way to let her know exactly who I was. Here's what happened to me. Here's my whole story. Here's why I think what I think, and why I believe what I believe. And I did all that work, and she read the book, and she called me just weeping one night. And we talked about it, and she just, she said lots of sad things, and I don't know, I'm gonna cry if I think about it. But a month later, after that, just incredible, pivotal conversation, and we'd really grown. I told her I loved her, and I'd been very withholding about that. It felt like, it still kind of felt like a betrayal, to my adoptive mom, to tell another mom that I loved her. And I also just, I feel like I don't want to say I love you to anyone. I don't want to do that. It's going to make me vulnerable, and what is love, etc. And so I wasn't, I didn't want to, but I knew that I had to push through that, and I told her I loved her, and I felt like I said, Oprah's gonna have us on her couch, and we're gonna talk about this. You're gonna be with me for this whole book tour. And then, a month after she read the first draft, she called me, and she'd woken up with all this blood in her eye. And so she went and did some tests, and it turned out that she had leukemia. And it went quickly. It took her life in 13 months. So she died in May of this year. And, by the end, we were close. I think about all the times that I was with her, and I was like, I really just wanted to stare at her for a long time to kind of just register, like, okay, there are the lines that are my lines, there's my dimple. I wanted to look at her for, I think, too long. Like, you can't stare at people for that long. And so I would always catch myself doing it, and then I would look away because it's too long to look at someone. But the night before she died, she was quiet and she couldn't see, and we were talking, and I just said, like, Mom, like, don't try to talk. Like, I'm just gonna look at you. And I did. I looked at her for a long time, and by then, I mean, like, all of the kind of the fat had left her face. Like, she was just cheekbones, and still I was like, there's my cheekbones, Yeah, that was a really special night, and it was, the next day, she was with my wife, Tony, when she died, and I cried, and I cried a lot, and I still cry a lot. But the truth is that I'm so proud of my sorrow. Like, I'm endlessly proud that I'm not sad about someone I could have met, or a moment or a reunion that I'd put off, and I'm mourning the possibility. No, I knew her. And I loved her, and she loved me. I found her, we recovered that relationship, and I miss her every day as the full person that I knew that she was. And honestly, that makes me really proud.
As you should be.
Just gonna play with my infinity cube.
I only have one more question, because I think that we might be running on time, but I have to ask it. How many times a day do you think you think about a Bible story, or think about God?
All the time.
What is your relationship with God? I know that is a huge question, but where are you now?
Oh yeah, I'm out. I'm fully out. I feel like I've got friends who left the church, and they'll be like, I'm an atheist, and they'll like snap their suspenders about it, like, I'm an atheist. But it just feels like, yes, you guys know. I don't want to live in response to an idea I've rejected. So I'm not an atheist. No, I'm out. I don't think about God. I don't think about going back to church. There are things I miss about church, the community, the singing practice. Oh,
you're an excellent singer.
That's because of all that church. I've thrown that all out. Closer to an anti-theist than an atheist. I don't even think it's good. I don't want to do it. That said, the Bible is full of some of the coolest stories, and not cool in like an instructional way, just like, this is wild. Yeah. So anytime that I have an opportunity to tell a full Bible story from beginning to end, I will take it. Maybe it's just because I know them so well, and like, what else are you gonna do at this point as an anti-theist with all of these Bible stories and all this Bible knowledge, but bring it up at weird times, and when it's not socially appropriate to tell the story of Jonah. I'm going to keep doing that.
I love it. I'd like to take some questions from the audience, if there are any. Does anyone have anything that they'd like to ask Harrison?
Sure.
All right.
I'd like to thank you both for sharing this evening. I'm Bob Harrison. I'm a survivor of the music industry, 27 years, left in 94, the business side of it. Harrison, I'm wondering if you'd mind sharing with us your journey from manuscript to publication.
Oh, yeah. The first thing I did is I got medicated for my ADHD, and like,
I bet it changed lives.
Oh my God! I'll tell you, all the other times I tried to write this book, I couldn't get there because I hadn't done the work, etc. But I also just had not gotten medicated. So I did, and then, I sat down to write the first chapter, and I finished it in like a month. Like, I don't finish anything. Some of you have tried to work on projects with me before, and you know what normally happens. So I couldn't believe that. And then, my agent said, hey, you got to do it again. We'll need 2 chapters for this proposal. So I just sat down and I did it again. I was like, oh my God, I did it 2 times. So after that, I thought the smart thing to do here is let's outline the rest, and then let's really gamify it. Because I'm not going to be able to just write this thing through to the end. But what I can do is break it down into 10 chapters and then try to commit to I'll finish a chapter a month. And, if I went a few days over, that's okay. I'm my own boss. It doesn't matter. But I'll try to finish. So I went through each chapter like that. But while I was doing that, I was also having all of these just wild realizations about my own childhood and what had happened. And like I said, getting my head around my own abuse and getting weird and getting sad. And I think probably not that fun to be around. So, my partner and I had talked about getting me a therapist. And I'd had a therapist. And what happened is we got around some really great issues. And then we started talking about race. And she said, oh, I hope you don't think I'm a racist. I was like, I don't... I really don't want to have to reassure you in this space, And I realized that I needed to find a Black therapist so that I could really drill down to this stuff. But sometimes I don't have that much initiative. So my beautiful, loving wife Tony found me a Black therapist, and in this city, that is no small feat. Thank you, my God, thank you. So yeah, then it was just a lot of time sitting in the basement. I think that you should write in every frame of mind. So I would write sober, and I would write drunk, and I would write really high, and then I would decide I don't really want to write this. I just want to tell this story to someone. So I would call someone, and I would tell them the story that I was too afraid to write down, and I would transcribe it and edit that. I did every single thing I could think of to just get the words out of my mind. And once they were on the page, I edited them, and I trusted my editor to help me with that. But there were a lot of parts of this book that were so painful that I kind of just closed my eyes and wrote it and never looked at it again. I have not edited that haircut that happens in chapter, I think it's chapter 7. I never went back. I read that. Or I read it, the first time I actually read it was when I recorded the audiobook, and it was just, actually the meeting with Letitia, I wrote it, and I did not go back. I didn't really make any changes to that. And there were a few other moments that, I can tell this story, but to sit down and agonize over the words and, really, really be in it, it was painful. It was really hard. Again, I'm grateful for my therapist. I'm grateful for my ADHD meds, grateful for weed, and everything else that I was able to do to get this out. But that process was not easy. I got really low. At one point, I got very suicidal. I picked a spot. It's actually one of my favorite stories because it's dark, but it's weird. This is how I tell these stories.
Okay,
I was like, I'm going to jump off the bridge across from the Safeway at Victoria and Broadway, right? And it seems like a good bridge because there's a box there that's like, don't do it. So I was like, oh, okay, so it's a good bridge. And so I looked, and I was like, I don't think I'm gonna do it. This is a bad idea. You shouldn't do it. And then I walked away. And then this old man comes up to me. This is true. He comes up to me and he's like, the raven saw you. I was like, what? And he's like right over there. And he points to this raven, and this raven was fucking huge. This is a big raven. And he was just kind of standing on the bridge looking at me like, I did see you. And I was like, okay, well, that's too weird. I'm not gonna jump because of the old man and the raven. So instead I finished the book, and I'm grateful again to my therapist and my wife, and also this strange old man and this weird creepy bird that I did see.
And your humor.
Yes. Anyhow, yeah, and then I came out of the darkness and I finished the book and I published it, and now I'm here and I'm real happy about it.
Does anyone else have a question?
I have a question.
Please.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Harrison, when you look back in your life as a child and university growing up, what was the hardest for you, being Black or adopted?
Oh, yeah, that's an incredible question. I don't know. I mean, these things are all very intersectional. I think that, like, being Black is really difficult. But I mean, sometimes it's pretty in your face, and you'll have these moments where you'll just be like, "Oh, that was troubling." But being adopted is just, it leaves you with all of these strange little, these feelings that you can't place, and like the fear of abandonment, the fear of rejection, the just kind of like lingering sense of loss. I just kind of assumed I'm just a sad person. And then you meet other adoptees and they talk about these things, and you spent like 9 months just like in a body. You learned the smell of this person, you recognize the voice of this person, and then suddenly you're given to someone else, and we think that that's not going to leave like a horrible mark. It's not going to leave some kind of lasting impression. When my son was born, you caught him and then you said, "Hi." And he opened his eyes, because he knew you. And I just think, to be taken away from the first person in the world, your safety and your context for you, and then just kind of be left to figure that out, and just have that as like an invisible sensation, this loss. It's hard. So I don't know, being Black is hard, being adopted is hard. Being Black and adopted, it's doubly hard. I don't know which one I would pick as harder. It's just hard.
Marvelous book. I hadn't had a chance to read it all the way through. I just had it for a short time, so I picked through some of the stories, read the first part, which was mesmerizing, which you read again tonight. Your voice was wonderful to hear. But what struck me as this complicated relationship you have with your adopted mother. Mm-hmm. So I haven't read the whole book, so I haven't been able to complete it. Because it sounds like, you really, in places, you care about how she feels and you care about her feelings. Mm-hmm. And it sounds like you don't want to hurt her. And do you have some insight or insight that you can offer?
That was a big part of the impediment to writing this book, was knowing that, even a generous portrayal of my mom is going to make her look pretty monstrous, and for me, these were just the realities of my life. So I tell these stories like, oh, it's just kind of how my mom was. But, when other people read them and they just think, how could somebody do this? Like, I don't know, that's what happened to me. But she's my mom, and I always felt, such an allegiance to her, and I knew about her insecurity, and I knew that she wanted to connect with me, but that she didn't know how, and I really tried so many different ways to help her. So, I still, when this book came out, and all this week I've been talking about it and trying to just be, trying not to pull any punches, to just tell the truth and say what I'm feeling. But every time I do an interview, I think, like, what if she hears it though? And how's that gonna make her feel? I feel there are still moments every day where I feel like, oh no, you really betrayed your mom by writing this book. You shouldn't have done that. And I try to remind myself that the whole point of this exercise is that you can do that, and that children are allowed to tell their life story, and they should not have to stay silent because it's going to embarrass their abusers. Yeah, but these are things that you know with your head that you might not necessarily know in your heart. I'm delighted about the reception. I'm so excited to be here, but I'm very conflicted because my brainwashing says you're not supposed to do this.
Well, I'm glad you did. Telling your truth for the ages.
Thank you.
Actually, I have another question too, but about your biological dad.
The captain.
The captain.
The only part I read was when you first connected with him and going into the.
Oh yeah, that's not the captain. That's
and
Corey.
I mean, what's that like?
Yeah, that's been tricky. He did not make a good first impression. And while I was writing the book, I called him to try to explain to him why I was including that story and what it was going to look like, And I knew that he'd be mad, but my hope was that he would hear me, and that his desire to have a relationship with me would lead to some understanding, a little bit of grace. But he came to visit Trinika. He came to visit Trinika on her bedside when she was dying, and he got a hold of the book and he read chapter 9, and he got so upset that he wrote an angry letter to the publisher, and he convinced her to say that everything in the book was a lie, and the book was postponed for a while, and then the only way to get it unpostponed was to sit down with him and grovel. And it was the most humiliating experience of this entire memoir writing process. It was just absolutely ridiculous. And there were a few times where he was just saying the dumbest stuff to me that I just thought, you're blowing it. I really want a relationship. I'm out here looking for family anywhere, just hear me, and I would say, hey, read the whole book. When you get to chapter 9, you'll understand why I told it that way. He was like, I'm never going to read your book. I was like, okay, well, yeah, that's it for you then. So, I don't know what happens. I'm very forgiving. I'm very open. There's still a way for him to have some kind of place in my life, but he'd have to do a lot differently. So for now, he remains, I think, a really disappointing opportunity.
We have time for one more question.
Two things. When you were talking about being in camp, it made me laugh because it reminded me of the sketch group, Little Britain.
Oh, yeah.
The only gay in the village.
Yeah.
And then second of all, did your adoptive parents ever know any other Black families? And why did they adopt you?
Yeah, why did they adopt? Yeah. I think that, people adopt because they want a baby, right? And that's one of those things that I think overrides all of the other considerations that maybe you should make when you adopt. My adoptive mom would say all the time, we adopted because we wanted a baby, and we said we don't care what color. That's a weird thing to say, but okay. And I think that adopting me made them feel less racist. I think that I was a very cool designer baby at one time in the 80s. You've seen how people treat Black babies, right? We're cute like baby deer. So they would fawn over me and give me sweets and fruit and all these weird things. And I'm sure that was really fun and exciting for my adoptive parents. But babies grow into people. I think often people really just think about the baby. Yeah, I wanted a baby, but you adopted a person. And this person is going to grow conscious, and they are going to look back on that choice, and they're going to ask questions, and they're going to wonder what the hell you did to their real mom. Where did she go? I don't I don't think that my parents asked for a Black baby. I think that I know from doing some research that there was a shortage at that time of healthy white babies, and it was reported in the media, it was reported in the Vancouver Sun, a bunch of social workers were saying it, there just weren't enough white babies. So, then you have to think outside the box. And I think that's what happened with my parents. There was another part to that question.
Yeah, did they know any black people?
No. We, in Abbotsford, there were other black children, but they were all being raised by white people too. It was very rare to see a black family together. And so we weren't friends with any black families. There was another black boy at church. He was being raised by a white family too. Same with his sister. There was, I met other black kids, no black families, and I didn't know how to speak to the other black kids that I met. We'd been taught different languages, and I mean, you probably know how this feels as when you are the only black. This is our term that we use for this. Yeah, I met a guy he was like, I was the only black guy in Fort St. John. I just knew exactly what his life was like. You meet other black folks, and suddenly you become very conscious of the ways that you've changed yourself in order to fit in this white space. And I've found at times I'll feel a little bit ashamed, and I'll try to mumble so they don't hear that I actually sound like a guy who grew up in the Fraser Valley. And it just kind of throws you a little bit because you see all the compromises you've made. There weren't very many opportunities for me to have black folks in my life, but I ran from those opportunities because I didn't know what to do. I wasn't ever shown what to do. I didn't have any role models in my life that would say, hey, every black person feels that weird anxiety that they're not black enough, even in a black space sometimes, I watched that Summer of Soul documentary where it was I feel it was Gladys Knight was I was performing in Harlem and everyone was accepting me and I'd never felt black before. It was what? Mm-hmm. Gladys Knight of Gladys Knight and the Pips does not feel black enough? Well, then what am I complaining about? That's ridiculous. So, I wish that there had been more black folks in my life, but, I was raised by racists, so I'm not surprised that there wasn't.
Seems like a wonderful, fitting end.